Hey everybody, Chad at Turner's Warehouse. Welcome back to the custom pen making series. This is video 4 where we are going to shape, polish, and finish up this pen. Now if you haven't watched the other parts, go check those out. Part 1 is going over all the tooling we used to make the pen. Part 2 was making the cap and body, doing all the threading. Part 3 was making this little guy, the section. And then today we are going to turn, polish, and finish this. And I'm going to show you a couple little tips and tricks along the way. So let's get started. Here's what we're going to need. We're going to do our body, cap, and section on our mandrels. We'll be using those in a collet chuck on the lathe. For turning, I'll be using some easy wood tools. I have a negative rake, square, a round, and a diamond. And then for polishing, sanding, polishing, we're going to use some 600-800 wet dry paper, some Zona polish paper, and some ring bling to give it a little extra shine at the end. Okay, so I'm getting my collet chuck ready. I've got a collet that will hold my mandrel. Now, when you're getting your collet chuck ready, you want to make sure and snap the collet into the nut so it doesn't fall out like that, and then put it in. You can't put the nut in first, the collet in first, then the nut. It will not work correctly. So once you got it in, you can tighten it down and put it on the lathe. This is our cap mandrel, and we're going to screw it on just like this, and it'll hold it in place. Now I do have a line here. It's kind of worn off. It was from the other videos. And what this line is, this is where my hole ends in the cap. So if I take this out, I could probably put anything in there. You can see that that's where my hole ends. And I want to know that on this because when I go to turn this, I want to taper my end a little bit, and I don't want to taper too early and cut off the end of my part by hitting the hole. Let's go to the lathe. Okay, now, so turning this is pretty straightforward. You're going to just turn as normal. However, you don't have any guides or any bushings to lead you, so you want to make sure and pay attention to how far you are turning it down. Now, if you remember in the first couple videos, I put a center drill on each end, and now that's going to come back to play. I'm going to put my live center up here and just snug it up. And I will tell you, for this, you want a good live center that runs true. This is a Record Power Falcon, I believe, and the Falcon has interchangeable tips. I am just using the 60-degree cone on this, and it works really well. But you want a good live center because you don't want any wobble, or it'll create wobble in your part. Okay, so a couple of quick things. One, I am going to run the cam vac here, so there will be some noise, but I want to suck any dust or chips I can away from me. Secondly, there is a method to my madness as far as the order. I always do the cap first, then the body, then the section, and I'll show you why in a little bit. It helps to have the cap and body done for when you fit the section, so that's just why I do it. So basically, I'm going to turn this round. I'm going to leave my line so I can see it. I'm going to get it down to the size I want, and then I'm going to do a taper cut with my easy wood diamond. You could use a saw or whatever, parting tool, but I like to use the diamond because that gives me a little more movement, and then we will have the shape we want. Now you want this snug and turning, but you don't want to tighten it so much that you're putting pressure on this. Keep in mind, as time goes on, this is going to loosen up like that already because of the friction, and we're just pushing it into soft resin. So you may have to snug up your tailstock from time to time. So I just want to round it first. And hopefully you guys can hear me well. I do have the cam vac running. And you can see I'm going to kind of leave my line just for a minute. I want to get this part rounded because it's certainly out of round because I never rounded this blank, even though I'm going to cut off most of that. So once I've got this cap nice and smooth, I'm going to grab my diamond tool. Now there's a couple of things here. Whenever you're doing this and you're going to use a cut with, whether it be a diamond like this or a parting tool or a saw, you don't want the thing running, because what can happen is your material that you're cutting and your cap, if you have a tool in between there and there's not enough leeway, it can actually bind, and what it'll do is it'll snap up one part, up or down. It could mess up your threads, it could crack the body, all kinds of stuff. So you don't want to do that. So once I get to the point where I want to separate this, I'll show you. I'm going to turn off the lathe. And I'm not there yet, I'm just saying when we get there. So I'm going to come in at an angle here, and I'm going to just give this cap, this will be a fairly simple little straight pen. I'm just going to give this cap a little bit of an angle. So I'm going to push away, and I'm just creating a separation so that if I get too close, I don't bind that tool. And this Alumilite is great, but it does wind up a lot. Now you can round this cap, you can make a little diamond, you can make it flat, whatever you want. Because we're still gonna sand and polish, so we can do a little shaping there. But I wanna get it in the ballpark here. Now what I'm gonna do is get this down to where my cut is very, very obvious. Now I don't have to worry, I know where that separation is. Now I can turn the rest of my cap down. I can get rid of my line there. You can see I got a big bump here to shape out. I can kind of shape this. I'm gonna give it a little bit of an angle to it. Remember, you probably want to measure, because you don't want to cut into your hole where your cap hole is that you drilled out. So I'm just gonna shape this down. And you can measure it and have some guidelines. Obviously, if you're trying to repeat the pen and make, the same model over and over, you want to have some guidelines of your sizes. This is a one-off, so I'm not real worried about it. So I'm just going to go till it looks good, and then I'm going to call it good. Now, what I can do is back this up. I can unscrew this carefully, and I can look at my thickness. So I'm probably, I would say, 1 millimeter or close to it. So I do have a little room if I want to take it down. I probably won't. Let's grab the body. Now remember, don't get a lot of shavings in there if you can avoid it. All right. Now the body's going to come down quite a bit, so that actually looks pretty good. So I'm probably going to go ahead and leave that where it is. It looks pretty good to me. I could take a tiny bit more off, and that would expose any transparencies if we have them in the blank, which isn't a bad thing. Now every time you take this off the mandrel and back on, you're probably going to get a slightly different position, which could mean, even though you turned it, that you have a little bit of out of roundness for what you're then doing. So let's watch and see. It doesn't look too bad. So that means I was pretty round, because I do have pretty decent ribbons here. If it was real stubby stuff, it would show that I wasn't quite right. But it looks okay. All right, now I'm going to separate the cap from this waist part. I'm just going to get it a little thinner. And remember, you don't want to cut all the way through, so be careful not to get too far in. I just want it supported. And you want to make sure and do this at the very end. If you have more shaping to do on the cap, do that first. Okay. We're pretty close here. So here's how I like to do it. Now again, you could cut that, you could use a parting tool a little further. This resin is fairly soft. Well, I'm gonna actually cut a little more. It's pretty robust resin. And this is a top choice blank. It's an Alumilite blank that we make here at the store. So if you're wanting to try this type of blank, we have lots of cool colors. All right, that's definitely better. I was too thick. But what I can do is now pop this off. And you see I got a nice little jagged edge there. But by turning my lathe back on and just coming into the end here, I can give it a final shape. And you see those nice curls there? I'm pushing into the blank. So I'm not risking pushing this way or that way. I'm pushing towards the center. So I don't have a lot at risk as far as messing it up, but I can get rid of all that material that was messy, and I can give this a little more shape how I want. I'm just gonna give it a little taper, and we're good. And then we're gonna sand this nice and smooth. So let's move this out. Okay, so I'm gonna sand the cap now. You could go through and turn everything and then come back and sand if you like to cover up your lathe and whatnot, but I tend to just sand each piece as I go, which works fine. I will get the lathe wet, so if you're not into that, make sure you cover your lathe better. But I clean and oil this lathe constantly, so I'm not worried about if it gets a little water on it. But I'm gonna start off with 600 wet dry paper. I'm gonna use 600, 800, and then I'm gonna Zona polish it. So this is gonna be a pretty quick process, but it's really gonna bring out the shine and the colors in this resin. So let's jump on this. And I'm gonna run the lathe for this about 7 to 900, whatever the lowest I can get on this high speed setting is. I do have my lathe on the high belt because I'm turning, so I want it fast. So that is our pre-polished sanded blank. And you can see there's a few little tool marks, and I wanna level it out and, you know, keep this like a little bit more of a rigid versus rounding it over type thing. All right, so we're gonna do everything wet, our sanding and our polishing. And this is, like I said, 600. This is our most aggressive grit. You can start lower, but keep in mind, you're gonna have to sand through all the grits to get those scratches out as you go. And with a carbide tool, we're leaving a pretty smooth finish other than our tool marks. So we can sand this pretty quickly starting at 600. But like I always say, do what works for you in your method. Try to get to where I don't block the camera. Now I'm gonna get right up to my mandrel, but I'm gonna try not to hit it as much as I can because I don't really wanna sand the aluminum into my blank. This isn't wood, so I don't have to worry about it taking the color, but I just don't wanna hit that if I can. And you can see this white in my sandpaper, lots of stuff coming off. And you see I'm not really rounding this edge. I wanna kind of keep more of a sharper edge. Not sharp to the touch, but sharp visually. And like I said, keep it wet. The wet is good for two reasons. Two reasons I wet sand are: one, I think it looks better. I think everything looks better wet sanded. And two, probably the most important, is it keeps all the dust in the water instead of in the air. So I'm not breathing this dust because it's all getting put into this water. You can see there's no dust. I'm not running the cam vac at the moment because I'm sanding this. All right, let's turn this off and take a look. Now, when it's wet, it's always gonna look good. So if you can kind of dry it with your hand, you wanna look for any scratches, imperfections, stuff you wanna clean up. I don't see any, so that looks pretty good. So I'm gonna move on to the next grit. This will be 800. And I won't have to do a lot here. Really, I'm just kind of working through before I hit my Zona paper. So you can see I'm not rounding that corner. That's just for the look. If it rounded a little, I wouldn't really care. It would look fine. But this is a pen with no clip, obviously. So this one I'm not going to do much. Make sure we're feeling smooth. And if there's imperfections, generally you can feel it with your finger. So that one looks good. All right, now, I'm going to use Zona paper. Zona paper is a polishing pad or polishing paper, a lot like micro mesh, which we're all kind of familiar with in the pen world. But it is soft paper. It comes in 8.5 sheet by 11, and you can cut it however you want. So this is cut into a strip, but I'm actually just going to cut a little square off of this, and I'm going to work through the 6 pads. The grit essentially is like 700 grit to 24,000 grit in just those 6 movements. So it moves very quickly. So you do have more of an abrasive type here, although it won't take out scratches, it'll just polish them. So don't count on this lower grit to do any reworking or shaping. It is just polish. But I like this, and I work through the whole line because I think I can get a good polish. Now you're gonna see at the end so you can judge it. This with a little bit of our ring bling, I think it's hard to beat. So I'm going to cut a little 1-inch square. You can usually use these for 4 or 5 pens or pieces, and then I'll switch them out. So it's kind of nice. It lasts quite a long time because you can cut it. So I'll just cut these about the size I want for holding, and that's the size I'm going to use today. And there again, same as before, I'm going to get it wet. The dark side is always the grit side. Now, when you get to the white, it's a little hard to tell because they're both white, so you kind of want to hold it in order so you don't risk it. But you can hear just a little bit of a sanding sound, a little grit, and you can see the white on there. But I just really want to work these. I generally tell people who are new to this stuff, give it at least 30 to 45 seconds. If you go a little longer, that's not bad at all, but give it at least that amount of time. So because this end piece is kind of on its own, it gets its own time. And you can see I'm dunking the water fairly often. I want to clear away any of that sanding debris, the white dust that's in the water, and I want to keep it wet. By keeping it wet, I can't overheat it, which is good. And like I said, I think it gives it a little better shine. There you can see a lot of white getting on there now. And you can hold it on top. I'm trying to hold it on the bottom here for the camera, but hold it wherever it's comfortable. Switch hands often, whatever you need. But you're going to see this by the time we get to the third, and see when I dunk it, the white comes off, so it clears out pretty easily. But by the time I get to the 3rd or 4th grit, you're going to see it not only shining because of the water, but the blank will start to shine through, which is really nice. All right, there we go. So we'll just work through these now. And we're going to do all 6 grits just the same. Okay, so this is my last one, the white. It's equivalent to 1 micron. So if I take a paper towel and rub it on this afterwards, technically I'll be scratching it because this is finer than that. So you want to be real careful when you're done. And you want that shine to really last. But I've worked through these fairly quickly. I like the fact that there's only 6 instead of 9, which I think micromesh has. Nothing wrong with micromesh, but I'd rather do less than more. And I think the shine is better, personally. So even though that's wet, you can start to see the shine deeper than the water, and it's really looking good. So even though I sped up that last little bit where I went through all the grits, this has only taken a few minutes to get to this point. And let's take a look. So that looks pretty cool. You got some nice sparkle in there, and our transparencies in the red and the orange, a little bit in the brown. So it looks pretty cool. So what I'm going to do is just get the water off of here. So I'm going to just kind of squeeze it on here. I mean, if you rub it, you're not going to kill it, but no sense. And I'm going to put a little ring bling on. Ring bling is just a polish cleaner. You can also use like the Meguiar's Plastics or whatever your favorite plastics polish is. This is the one I like. Shake it up. So So I'm going to put a little dot on here, and I'm just going to move it around on this. So you can see the line of where it is. I want to get it all the way to the end, and I want to get it all the way to the other end, of course. To the end. And I just want to kind of hold that on there and let it shine up. And it's going to clean all the debris and polish. Now that's where I hit my aluminum. So if you do that, you certainly don't want to put that back onto your piece. But let's get all that off of there and see how she looks. Not too bad. Actually, it looks like, yeah, it looks pretty good. All right, so there is our cap. Now, if you were concerned about this, you can always hand sand the end here to make sure that you have a good finish on it. I think we might have sanded this when we did it. I don't remember, but it looks pretty good. So there's a nice cap. Look at the cool colors in it, where it all meets at the end. You can see like the clears. So this will make a really cool pen because it's got some cool colors. Let's get the body loaded up on the lathe and get that one turned and polished. Okay, I switched collets. I put a 1/2 inch, I believe, in there for this one. This is my body. Now the process is exactly the same. I have a faint line from earlier, and I'm just going to kind of make it a little brighter so I can see it. And I'm going to load this up. I've got my center drill hole on the back. And just be careful when you're doing this. You don't want to ever cross thread it because you got, in this case, a metal mandrel with plastic threads. I don't want to damage them. And the other thing is you always want it tight up against the shoulder of your mandrel. If you have it back here and you start turning, there's room for it to turn and move, and it's a good way to rip your threads out because it'll start moving and it'll hit if you got a tool on it, and it'll basically try to keep spinning the blank on the mandrel, and it'll rip your threads out. And that probably will happen when you do this for the first few times, so don't fret if it does. Just do your best. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start it up again. I'm going to separate exactly the same way. I'm going to try to kind of mirror this little shape. So I'm going to have a little taper and that little tiny bit of rise on the end. I'm just going to try to mirror it on the back. So I will run the cam back again. And I'm going to speed up the lathe, of course. And so first thing, I'm just going to get it round. And I'm a little out of round here. Not too bad. And you can see my live center is stopping because it's that plastic is spinning so much more, it just hollows out the hole. So snug it up without killing it. And this one I have a lot more wiggle room as far as my hole, because remember the inside hole was only for the M10. So this is a much, much bigger body. So I have a little more room to work on as far as the shaping and bringing it down in size. But I'm going to go ahead and cut my end here. And there, you can do this however you want. So if you don't like my method, do it your way. But if you're going to try to repeat, make sure you do it in a way you can repeat the process. All right, now we can kind of shape this body down. And looking at, and there again, you can measure, but looking at this is my threads, my M14. That's an M14 on the body. I'm just about 1 millimeter, 3/4 or 1 millimeter bigger. So I can kind of eyeball this. I could measure, but this is going to be an eyeball pen for us. So we're going to just turn this down. So obviously shape is totally your choice. I like the cap to sit a tiny bit proud of the body. So I think by what I can see here and what I can see on the cap that I'm going to achieve that. And I got a little bit of a taper down. It's kind of a big pen anyway because it's an M14. But you can see these really cool swirls coming out of this sucker. This is going to look great. So I'm pretty pleased with the shape of the body. So now I can separate my end and do the sanding and polishing. And I think it's going to look really good. If I wasn't sure, I could take it off and try the cap, but I think we're okay. So I'm going to separate the same way. And I'm just cutting in and then down to give myself room. Remember, you don't want to cut it all the way through here. It's a good way to mess something up. All right, so that should be, there we go. And now I'm just going to cut in on the end here, gently. That looks pretty good. I like that. All right, so that's how I'm going to leave it for the cut. Now, one thing you'll notice when people make custom pens for the first time is a lot of them have holes in the end because they put their live center on there. Maybe they didn't have that extra little bit, but when we measured these out in the first video or the second video, we had that extra little bit just for that reason, because you can see this hole where my live center has pushed in and in and in. It's going to be really big by the end. So if this was in my cap and I was counting on this material to be part of my pen, I'd have a pretty deep hole I would either have to live with or do something with, try to cut it out. But I mean, you're probably talking it's a good 1/8 of an inch or 1/8 to 1/4 deep. So it would be really hard to get rid of that point. But you can see how we did this and we cut this off. We left the end with no point in it. So really it's preference of what you're looking for and how you want it to look. All right, we're going to do the exact same process here. So maybe we'll speed this up for you. I'm going to do the 600, 800 wet sandpaper, and then I'm going to work through all the zonas, and I'll slow it down when I get back to the polishing. How about that? All right, so we got it all polished up. And I'm going to hit it with some ring bling just to give it a little extra shine. I kind of think it gives it like a wet shine. Now, if you're wondering, I said something about paper towels and then I'm using a paper towel. I'm trying to keep it on the wet part. So I'm not necessarily trying to rub this paper towel on it dry, but you can see the ring bling has spread all over. So I'm using that area to keep it. And it kind of soaks through a little bit. All right. Get this off of here a little bit. Just went over the edge. So that looks pretty cool. We got some really cool colors in that blank. Pretty neat. All right, so we can do a little test fit since I didn't test fit this for turning it. I kind of just went by eyeball. And I think it's going to work out all right. Size-wise, looks good. We're just a little proud on the cap, which is what I was going for. So that looks pretty good to me. All right, let's get that section on here and get her turned. Now, one quick thing before we put this on here. Let's talk about section mandrels. There's two ways you can do it. One way is you can have a mandrel that goes in your collet that you thread your section into. and then you put a live center up here. Now, the benefit of that, I think, is that you could get this front when you're doing that, but the downside to me is that all that pressure is putting it on this tenon, which in my doings has ripped a lot of tenons off. So I don't ever use that. I generally use this type, which is basically like the mimic of the nib, and it goes in and threads up, and you want it to thread up to the shoulder. Now, that being said, you have metal in the way, so you can't get the front of this section sanded or shaped in any way. And we don't really need to shape it, but I do want to sand it. So what I'm going to do is put it in a collet before I put it on the mandrel, and I'm going to sand the front of this. So let's do this real quick, and we'll get this in there, and we'll just sand the front of this real fast, polish it, and then we'll flip it over and put it on the mandrel. So I'm going to do the same process of grits as well as Zona paper. But it'll go really quickly because I'm just doing the front, and it's funny because I'm going to sand this whole thing, but in reality I'm going to be left with just a little tiny thin part after we turn all this down. So we're sanding a lot more than we're actually going to end up with, but that's okay. So I really only need the first like millimeter or two coming out of the hole. So I'm just kind of pushing into the hole. And it's going to sand pretty quick and polish pretty quick because it's spinning right at that axis. All right. Now I'm going to wait and I'm not going to ring bling this because I'm going to be putting it on the mandrel, and I don't want any extra lubrication in there. But you can see on the front of this, here I'll pop it out, just that little bit and fairly quick sanding and shaping gave us pretty good look. Whoops, lifty loosey. So, looks pretty nice and shiny. Kind of looks like a marble. Okay, so I'm going to put this away for a minute. This is the smallest part, obviously, but it's my least favorite to turn because if you ruin it, then you got to make a new one. But we're not going to ruin it. So I'm going to put it on the mandrel. Again, this is just a little tiny guy. Now this mandrel is just a little larger than the size I generally use, but we'll set that up once we get it going. Oh, there it is. Snap that in. We can load her up. And this is the only one that we don't use with a tailstock. Now I suppose you could use the tailstock, but we're not going to be turning anything on the tenon, and our mandrel goes all the way to the end here, so it's pretty robust. But like I said before, with the other one, what you don't want to happen is have a catch on your piece because it holds your piece, and the lathe wants to keep spinning, and those little tiny fine threads just shred. So you want to be careful to make nice smooth cuts. Don't get any aggressive entries or anything. And we're going to use the negative rake like we have been. Now, one other thing to consider, because we have to consider things. When this is on here, where do we want our section to line up? So I'm just kind of taking a quick visual. I actually don't have to take off a ton for that to kind of line up. Obviously, it has to be inside the threads or it'll block the threads. But we have to have the whole thing fit into our cap, so it can't, flare out at the top huge. But I do tend to like just a tiny gradual shape to it for like the finger grip. So I'm going to kind of turn this down to where I think, and then I'm going to put the body back on and take a look. And there again, feel free to measure if that's your thing. So I'm going to start making my rocking move. You can kind of see the shape I'm going for here. And I'm only clearing that really just so it's easier to see where I'm at. And I'm going to have the back be a little wider than the front. All right, let's take a look. Let's take a look at that. I think we got a little ways to go, but I'd rather sneak up on it than have it be too much. Yeah, I got a little more to go. So you can see I want that taper to line up just into my threads. That's the look I'm going for. Okay, and you can see why we weren't able to polish that front on the lathe, or on the mandrel, I should say. So I'm just giving that little bit of taper like I like. And then we're going to try it one more time. And this is a little bit of a stop and go type process, but better to be sneak up on it than, oh look, we're so close. We just need to come down a tiny bit. Oh. There we go. Don't want to unthread that. Got a little thread in there. All right, make sure that's snuggy. Oh, I forgot to turn the cam on. And I'm really doing my best to make a nice smooth finish. Because this is so small, I don't want to have to sand out huge lines. So I'm trying to get it as easy as I can for the finishing. Ooh, that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pop this off of here. And I need to test fit my cap. And what I need to make sure is that this clears the hole. Ah, see? Not quite. So I need to bring that down just a little bit on the front. And it's funny, look how shiny that front is where we polished it versus the matte on the side. So we need to take that down just a tiny bit and then we'll be in good shape. I'm going to use my little diamond here. And just come in here just a little bit. I'm kind of hitting my mandrel, but that's okay, because then I'll have it for next time. All right. So before I polish, I'm going to take it off one more time. Now I've got a really thin edge on this top, which I don't particularly like. So I could take some sandpaper. Here, we'll do it on the table. And I'm just going to, because I could try to turn that off or flip it or something, but it's so thin because of the way I just cut it back that I can just take it off holding this flat. And of course you can kind of look at it and see where you're at. But that took off that sharp corner, so now it's nice and rounded. So once I polish that, it's going to look good. Okay. Let's see how we are on fit. She fit good. All right, let's sand her down, polish her up. Try to be careful of crap on these little tiny threads. And if you're at all concerned, definitely stop and clean those, because you don't want to do all this work and get to this point and then ruin it with some cross threading or some spinning mandrel jacking up your section. Up here I've got that little bit of an angle, so I'm going to do it by hand and just kind of, here, see if you can see it on the camera. And then I can get the whole thing. Now this should not take much, because I did try to leave a really smooth surface with that carbide. But I kind of want to follow this shape. I don't want to flatten it out. So I'm going to use my thumb here. And you can make sections longer or shorter. Obviously this is our starter first pen. So this is just to get you the process. But you can make your sections any length you want. You just have to account for that in your caps and bodies and how they're going to line up and where they're going to go as far as depth. So once you develop your style of what you like and how you want it to look, you can change it up. This is a very, very simple section. It should hold the nib nicely, but it's nothing fancy. All right, we're going to do our Zona paper. And I could actually hit this little tenon on the back if I need to, but I think we're okay. All right, so I'm going to try to get it up here on the front, that little angle I've got. And this should come really quickly here. I'm just kind of wrapping it because it's so small. You could cut your Zona paper down if you were worried that it was too hard to hold or not hitting the right spots, but it seems to be okay. Now before I go too far, I want to stop this and look at it and make sure I didn't miss any scratches. So I'm going to try to dry it here. And it should just look matte, which is good. We just don't want any scratches, especially from the sandpaper. So I don't see any. All right, we'll keep going. And what I'm doing here is I'm angling the paper to kind of get it up on that front angle, and then I'll come back. So I am going to go ahead and ring bling this one as well. And I say ring bling, but it's just a plastic polish. Use whatever you want. Oh, wait, do I have a line there? Oh, yeah. So I see a line at the top there that I didn't get sanded out. That's where I made that back cut. So I actually need to resand this real quick. So let me do that real quick, and then I'll jump back to this spot so you guys don't have to watch that whole thing again. All right, so I went ahead and resanded that. Just had a little ring there. I'm going to put the ring bling on here and just give this a little polish. And if you have accidents like that where you, whoa, see I hit the metal. I don't want to use that again. So I'm going to put a little more just to lube this paper towel up. But you can have little accidents and you just got to go back and sand them up a little and fix them. And it's all good. Now I'm going to get up close there. All right, just get this off the end. Out of my threads here. I don't know if that'll be good or bad for threads, so I'm going to try to wipe it off here. All right, I think I got it all. Okay, so that is our section. Let's take it off, see how it looks. Boy, it's shiny, isn't it? What do you think, Amy? Okay, let's do a couple more things here and show you. This pen is on the home stretch here. So obviously we would have a nib, and I'll show you a little thing I like to do. I would go back and go over this, make sure I don't have any scratches that I missed. And I might give it another cleaning. I didn't mention it, but I did clean it before we started in the ultrasonic cleaner. But, so I did clean it beforehand, but if it needed it again, certainly throw it in the ultrasonic. You don't want any debris or dust in these threads. But what I'm going to do is, I like this pure silicone grease, and I like to put just a tiny bit on, and I mean tiny. And I'll just put that on. Put our section together. Put a tiny bit on here. Oh, way too much. And the reason I use this, I don't know, I don't like dry threads personally. So this tends to keep the threads a little more clean and moist. It's like thread moisturizer. I don't know of any negative issues with any materials. I use Alumilite mostly, and so far I have not seen any issues with it, but it works pretty well and it makes it smooth. Oh, that's a little tight, so I'm gonna have to go back and adjust that. We got a little snugness there. Could be debris from the turning because I didn't clean the inside of the cap, but you can see we have plenty of room in there. But that is our pen. So, a lot of little things you can do, a lot of tweaks you can make as far as size and shape, and as far as the interior of your pen to make it more customizable. I hope you've liked these videos. If you haven't seen 1, 2, or 3, please go back and watch them. It goes over all the tooling, the making of the cap and body with the threads and the section, and then today we covered the finishing. If you want to get started in this, check out Turner's Warehouse. That's my store, and Amy, who's behind the camera. And we have all the tools you've seen here on the store. Now, if we're out of stock at any point, we restock them constantly. So just put yourself on the waiting list, and you will get notified as soon as they come in. But I hope you guys will give this a try and take your pen making to the next level. Be sure and subscribe, because we're going to do more of these videos. Upcoming, I can think of, we have a clip, putting a clip on a cap. And what's the other one? Oh, making a rollerball custom pen. So a lot of fun still to be had. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, let us know.